So, already on the stage, is very well known in the Laravel community, being a core developer, right? And one of his most prominent projects actually was mentioned yesterday by Frank in one of his talks. So today we are going to have a look a little bit more in depth into PEST. Please welcome Nuno Maduro, sorry.
All right, cool. So let's get started. First of all, thank you so much for coming, and thank you, PHP for inviting me here. My name is Nuno, and I'm a Portuguese web developer living in Portugal, and I'm also a Laravel core team member. I work with open source, but I equally work on ecosystem on products such as Forge and Vapor. Yeah, today I'm not here to talk about Laravel. I'm here to talk about PEST PHP, which is a framework I have created. And for some of you who don't know what is PEST PHP, well, is an elegant PHP testing framework with a focus on simplicity. And honestly, it is damn simple. It's based on PHP unit, but gives you a totally different API that I think you will like. Today, I'm going to do a demo for you so you can see what is PEST PHP, and it's just better than telling you, it's just better to show you, right? But a small disclaimer. This is not a talk of PHP unit versus PEST, and I'm going to show you a lot of PHP unit examples just because you already know PHP unit in advance, and it's just better to put you in the same context. So that being said, let's get started. This is a fresh Laravel application. And just like many other frameworks out there, this is based on PHP unit. Laravel ships with PHP unit by default. And PHP unit is a standard in the industry for a long time now. And we all know how a PHP unit test looks like. We have a namespace, we have a class that extends something, and then we need to scroll down to see a public function to see our first test. And we are kind of used to it, right? In all honesty, I think that some PHP developers think that to have a PHP file, you need to have a class on it. Then, if we go to the terminal, we can invoke PHP unit, and this is the output we get. Again, we are super familiar with this. We have the PHP unit title, we have the version, we have two dots corresponding to two tests I have on my test suite. Finally, I have a good summary and an OK saying that my test suite is actually OK. And again, this is output. It's something that we are very familiar with. We have lived with this for the last 20 years, in fact. But today I'm going to show you an alternative. And to start with that alternative, which is PEST PHP, the only thing you need to do is clear your terminal and type composer require PEST PHP PEST. Because I wasn't sure about the internet connection, I have already run this command at home. But once you run this command, check this out. You can just clear the terminal and run vendor bin pest. Now, immediately you can notice two things. The first of all is that the output is immediately different from what we had before. But the second thing you can check out is that pest just works on top of existing PHP unit test suites, which is pretty neat when you are just have this legacy project already with PHP unit and you can just install PEST on top of it and things will just work. Now, regarding the output, we can see that is a little bit different indeed. We have two green marks with the word pass, meaning that two tests are passing in our test suite, and a little bit more simplified summary at the end with the number of tests passed and the number of time it took. Now, the output is different on a success test suite, but it's way more different when you have a failure. So I'm going to come here to this assert true method from PHP unit, and I'm going to try to check that if true is false. Obviously, I run this via PHP unit, and my test suite will fail. I have a F, meaning that I have a test that is failing. Then I have a small description right here. And finally, the file and the number of lines that is actually failing, meaning that I actually need to go to my editor and see the line that is actually failing. Now I'm going to show you the same result, but with PHP with PEST instead. So I'm going to clear the terminal and type PEST. So On the top, we still have the summary of our test suite, now with a failure and a pass. But then, if we scroll down, we have a really nice snippet just built for humans. We can look at this and just see a snippet of code that we understand, and then a small line right here just point us in the right direction. We can immediately understand what's happening. Now, when I was telling you that PEST is built on top of PHP Unit, I wasn't joking. In fact, all the features you love from PHP Unit, they're available on PEST. So, for example, I can clear the terminal and type vendor bin PEST with the option stop on failure. When I do this, obviously, just the first test have run, and I see a failure on this. I see that one test is failing, and another one is pending because we have instructed PEST to stop on failure. So we also noticed here during this very beginning of the presentation that PEST is a progressive testing framework, meaning that you can just install it on top of PHP unit tests. But besides the output, PEST also gives you a totally different API to write your tests. And before showing you that, I'm going to actually explain a little bit of the story because it was so many times mentioned yesterday. We all know Jest from JavaScript, and if you don't know, is just the most popular JavaScript framework in the world to write tests. And Jest comes with this it-describe API. It's kind of a functional way of writing tests on JavaScript. And on Laravel, we actually see that. If I go here to my left sidebar, I can click on routes and see this file with the name web.php. If I scroll down, I can see the routes of my application, or at least the most simple routes on my app. I can see this route facade being used, and this route facade is telling me, when you get a request on the root endpoint, just give back this string. And I find this very elegant, because we just have a 3-line snippet of code. If you get this, just give that. We don't need a class, we don't need a namespace, we don't need public functions. That extends, like all of those keywords, they are gone. With 3 lines, we have exactly what you need. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if we could have something like this, but this time on my test suite? And this is what I have come up with. I'm going to go here to my unit test once again. And I'm going to migrate this unit test to PEST PHP. The only thing I need to do is copy the content of my test, and then I can remove all of this boilerplate. We no longer need it. Once I remove all the boilerplate, I type the word test. Then I pass a small description, and for the sake of the demo, I'm going to say basic. Finally, I use a closure, and inside this closure, I'm going to copy the content of my test. And that's it. I come to my terminal, run PEST, and if I have fixed the test before with a true, I can see that my test suite is actually working as expected. These 3 lines right here are the equivalent of the 20 lines we had before. But because we take simplicity really seriously on the PEST PHP team, we actually have to simplify this a little bit more. So something I can do here is use a concept that I've come up with the name of higher order testing. And what is that? Well, it is, in fact, if all the code inside the closure chain methods on this variable, what you can do is just copy the content, remove the function, and just chain that on the test method. And yeah, the 20 lines we saw at PHP unit can be done with 1 line on PEST PHP. Now, besides this, I was telling you, PEST PHP have feature parity with PHP unit, so all the features you like, you can use them on PEST, and I want to show you a little bit more about that. I'm going to revert here to my closure-based function, and I'm going to try to use a feature of PHP unit, which is the skip feature, which allows you to skip one specific test. With PHP unit, you can use documentation, and I believe that now you can use also attributes. With PEST, it's super simple. The only thing you need to do is chain a method with the name skip. You do this, you clear the terminal, you run it, and immediately see one test being skipped on the output. Now, you can also do incomplete tests. On PEST, we call it pending test, because in fact, it's a test that is not being written. And this is very useful, a pending test, because sometimes you just want to keep a to-do list of tests you want to write. You may never write them, but sometimes you want to do that. So what you need to do on PEST is simply remove the closure, just like this. You remove the closure, just leave the description, you run your test suite, and then now we have an incomplete test. Now, besides keeping incomplete tests, we also have something on PEST with the name of datasets. And that's the equivalent of data providers in PHP Unit. Who here knows data providers in PHP Unit, by the way? Okay, it's like half of the audience. I think you will like what I'm about to show you. So on PHP Unit doing data providers would be something like this. I would probably come here and just write test the email validation and pass a closure, for example, which would be a public method on PHP Unit. Then to validate the behavior, I'm going to just simply type assert not empty. And this assert not empty will eventually take an email, because data providers, the goal is kind of rerun the same test, but with multiple information. So if I'm testing this email validation, I want to test it with potentially hundreds of emails. Now, again, on PHP Unit, I would probably use this argument right here with the name email, and then I would use this argument email multiple times within my test. Finally, I would have to create a data provider, and that's the part that I don't like that much. So I would have to just say data provider equals to get emails. And then I would need a public function to actually get my data provider. So it would be something like this, that actually returns a list of emails. So my test typically and by default would run now on PHP Unit and be executed twice on the output. But now I'm going to show you how this works on PEST. The only thing you need to do is copy the content of the emails you have, remove all of this boilerplate, and just say test the email validation with this number of emails. You do this, you clear the terminal, you run PEST, and check this out. On the output, you have now the email validation is being tested with a.gmail.com, but also being tested with b.gmail.com. So also an improved output on that regard. So this is datasets on PEST, but it's in fact inline datasets on PEST, because something I like to do, especially when I have hundreds of emails to test this email validation, is just put all of those emails in a separate file. And we can do that on PEST PHP as well. So I can just come here to my test folder, create a new folder, and this folder will have the name, datasets. Once I create the folder datasets, I can create a new file with the name emails. Within emails, I'm going to open a PHP tag, the one we love the most, and then I'm going to type dataset, pass an ID, which will be emails, and within this dataset specification, I'm going to get back into my unit test and copy the content of this array of emails. I copy it, I go back to dataset, and I'm going to say, all right, when somebody asks for a dataset with the name emails, just give back this array of data. Then I can go back into my unit test and just say, test email validation with emails. I clean my terminal, I run PEST once again, and we have exactly the same result. Except that now I can reuse this dataset potentially on the other tests. And something that is also useful when coding datasets is that you can just make lazy datasets, which is when you go fetch them, for example, from an external API. So I'm going to create a lazy dataset by simply passing a closure instead. I pass a closure, I can yield results if I want to, just like that to make this lazy. And if I do this, I equally get the exact same result. As you can see. And this is pretty useful. Sometimes you just want to fetch this information from somewhere. Sometimes you want to make this information random, and you are allowed to test the same test with multiple information. And this is datasets on PEST PHP. Now, I'm going to revert this, my unit test, to its previous state because I will need this test later. Actually, I'm going to just rewrite it to the way it was before. And we are going to move to more complex scenarios. All right, ensure my test suite is still passing, and it is. Now, so far, we have worked with very basic examples. We have worked with, honestly, the most basic example we can have on PHP unit and also on PEST. But the reality is that frameworks like Laravel, Symfony, and others, I believe, they offer you some kind of built-in testing API, which you can get endpoints, you can assert the status, you can check the database, you can check that emails got really sent. And this is no different on Laravel. Here on my unit folder, if I click on the feature test, I have something that looks like this, that will get the main endpoint and assert that our page is actually OK. Now, how can I migrate something like this but for PEST? You would be surprised to know that you just have to follow the same rules, meaning that I just come here and copy the content of my test. And again, I can just remove all of this boilerplate and type, it has a welcome page. I make a comma, pass a closure, and copy the content of my test inside of the closure. I close it, clear the terminal, run my test suite once again, and things just work. I can equally simplify this by following the rule we made before, which is higher order testing. And that's actually very simple. Again, I just copy the content inside of it, every content that chain on this variable. I remove the closure, and I just chain those methods here. Just like that. Clear the terminal, run it once again, and things just work. And if you want to be a little bit Laravel-ish, what you can do, just come here and say, instead of starters 200, just assert OK, which is an alias. And as you can see, it still works. And these 3 lines are the equivalent of the 20 lines we saw just before. Obviously, I can make this test fail, and I still have very nice snippets on my terminal that just points me in the right direction. So all of that just work. Now, let me explain a little bit of the magic behind PEST, because you probably are wondering, how the hell, like, this variable is like an instance of the PHP unit test case, but instead, on the feature folder, this variable is an instance of the Laravel test case. Well, in fact, when you run composer require PEST PHP, at that specific moment in time, PEST will create a file within your root test directory with the name PEST PHP. Now, this file is a sort of configuration file, but not written in JSON, written on PHP. And this file contains the conventions of your test suite. So in other words, we are telling to PEST, hey PEST, within the feature folder, always use the test case from Laravel. Means what? Every test that gets created within the feature folder, this variable will be an instance of the test case. And because there is no instructions whatsoever regarding the unit folder, that means that the unit folder should extend the default test case from PHP unit. And that's why when you go to the feature folder, we have so many methods here on this variable. Now, let's move to even more complex scenarios. Let's imagine for a second that I want to test my database. So I'm going to just type here, it as users. And within this test, I'm going to just use the Laravel API, the full Laravel API, so you can see how can you implement PEST in any PHP testing framework. I'm going to come here, and I'm going to just include the Laravel model by doing app models user. Then I'm going to use the user factory to create a database user. In fact, on Laravel, this works to create a fake database user. And just below, I'm going to assert that this information actually exists on my database. And I can do that on Laravel by typing this assert database has. Then I open parentheses, and I say on the table users, just check if there is an ID with the number 1. Clear my terminal, and I'm going to run now PEST. And for some of you who are familiar with Laravel, you will know this error. So I consider my error description something like this. There is a general error. There is no such table users. Meaning that Laravel didn't got informed that he needs to actually create a database for testing. He needs to run all the migrations and have a database testing for us within this test. And funny, on Laravel, the way you can instruct Laravel to actually prepare this database is that you need to include a trait, right? So it would be something like this. Use illuminate foundation testing refresh database. And then, if this was a class, you could just include this, use refresh database. And at this, if I would do this on Laravel with the class PHP unit approach, this test would run. But here, I'm using a function. So how can I kind of mimicate this behavior? Well, with PEST, again, we go to the PEST PHP configuration file, and we just say, all right, PEST, within the feature folder, please always extend the test case from Laravel, but equally use the refresh database trait. Just like that. I clear my terminal, I run once again, and things are now working. So this just means that instead of doing like namespaces and extends and whatsoever, you just explicitly say to PEST what this variable should be about. And I can move forward. I can just come here and create two tests on the same file. I can simply copy this, for example, just go below and say it as users2, clear my terminal, rerun my test suite, things still work with two tests now being grouped on the same test file. If obviously I try to pass the same description, I clear my terminal, PEST will tell me in the beautiful way, hey, there is already a test with that description, just rename it, all right? Let's keep going. Looking at this, I can easily see a way to refactor this because, in fact, we are kind of creating a user twice, right? We create a user to test the first test, then we refresh the database, and we create another user for this assert below. So I can assert this. I can refactor this, actually. I can use, because in fact, I want to run this line before each test. So I just tell that to PEST. I'm going to come here and say, hey, PEST, before each, then you pass a closure. Before each, just run this instruction right here. Then I can remove that instruction before each test, just like that. Clear the terminal, rerun PEST once again, and things still work in the same way, as expected. And now we can apply high-order testing here. We can go crazy because all the methods within the this variable are kind of chainable. So what we can do is just copy this, remove the closure, and just chain the assert. Obviously, the test below is kind of identical, so I can just do this. There we go. Clear the terminal, rerun my test suite, and things still work as expected. And now we have like a very small test, and I can tell you something like this on PHP unit, you would have to scroll a lot, all right? Also, something important to mention here with high-order testing, if I make this test right here fail, for example, the test number 1, only the test number 1 will fail, as you can see here. The test number 2, which is right below, it still runs. Okay, so let's revert this code, because there is, we are getting to the exciting part of PEST. All right. So if you use PHP unit, you use something that I like to call the assertion API. And what is the assertion API? Well, if we come to the unit test, something we are doing here is kind of using this assert and then specify what type of assertion are we doing. And this is what I like to call the assertion API from PHP unit. So let's use it a little bit and try to identify together what can we actually improve. I'm going to create here a variable. And this variable will have the content phpday. Then, the first thing I want to do with this variable is actually assert that is a string. So let's just type assert is string and pass the variable inside. Rerun our test suite, things are still working. And so far, I cannot actually identify any problems with this assertion API. But let's move forward. Let's now test that we can see the word PHP inside the variable. So I'm going to just type enter, and I'm going to type below this assert once again. And I'm going to type this assert string contains string, and then maybe pass the value first, and probably PHP later. Let's see. All right, so let's try it out to see how it goes. Well, PEST is telling me it failed to assert that PHP contains phpday. So the first thing I can identify here is that I have swapped the parameters. Actually, I want to use PHP as the first argument, and this is the first red flag. Like, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to pass first, if it's PHP or if it's the value. So let's fix it, rerun on my terminal. Now things are supposed to be working. But I can identify two more things that could be better. The first one is that I'm actually passing the value twice. So I'm passing the value, the variable value, on the asserted string, but I'm equally passing the variable value on the assertion just below. Then I can identify that assert string contains string. It's just two words for me. It's already complicated to even read this. And finally, I cannot chain assertions, meaning that I had to type again this assert. And things even get more complicated once you want to test the opposite thing. Let's imagine for a second that you want to test that that value doesn't contain JavaScript. So let's do it. This assert string not contains string. Then I'm going to open it and just say, all right, now I want to assert that the JavaScript word does not exist within the variable value. Let's rerun it. And PEST is still working, but I can identify the same issues, like I'm passing the variable once again, the method name is just too long, I almost had to scroll, then I have two parameters, not sure what comes first, I cannot chain assertions. So yeah, this is the assertion API, and it's perfectly fine if you love it, but today I'm going to show you something totally different. Today I'm going to show you something that ships with PEST, but you can ignore it, you don't have to use it, assertion API still works. But something that we have come up with that I think you will like. It's called expectation API. So working with the expectation API, you can do exactly the same stuff you do with the assertion API, just in the faster way, basically. So I'm going to type expect. And always, when you are using the expectation API, you always start with this function, expect. And then you just talk to PEST, like, what do you expect? Well, I expect the value to be a string. You click the terminal, you rerun your PEST once again, and things are still working. Then, you probably want to test as well that the word PHP exists within the value. And here is where it comes neat. Because if I want to do that, I can simply chain. I can just say, I expect the value to be a string, but I also expect the value to contain PHP. Just like that. Click the terminal, rerun once again, and I can see that I can chain the expectations. I just had to pass the value once, and methods are just smaller and still fully understandable. But now the magic thing comes. Like, if you want to test the opposite, you just say that to PEST. You just say, I expect the value not to contain the word JavaScript. You clear the terminal, we run our test suite, and things are still working. So to create an opposite expectation, the only thing you need to do is pass the not keyword. Once you do that, the expectation that comes next will be tested on the opposite side. In this case, not to contain the word JavaScript. So it just speaks better to me, the expectation API. But if you love the assertion API, you can just use it and ignore completely the expectation API. Now, I have mentioned multiple times, I'm going to mention again. PEST PHP, a full featured parity with PHP unit. So all the stuff we do with PHP unit, like assert equals, assert is string, assert is instance of, all of that things are included on expectation API. So here we have expect to be to something. You can have expect to be null. All of these things are included on expectation API, and they just work. All right. So this is the expectation API on PEST PHP. Let's move forward. I want to show you some feature flags, not feature flags, but some options we have when you run PEST. And talking about running PEST, did you notice how many times I had to clear my terminal and run PEST on the console? I was like 50 times. Every time I changed the code, I had to go to the console. It wouldn't be nice if PEST could just watch our file and just rerun itself every time we change it, right? It would be less typing on a keyboard. So PEST actually includes something, a feature like that. So the only thing you need to do is just say vendor bin PEST and just pass the word watch. And once you do this, PEST PHP will run once, but then if I come to my test, I can just type, I expect this to be the JavaScript day. I save it, and immediately PEST just runs automatically on the right. I can just come back, fix my mistake, save it once again, and PEST just reruns itself. This is pretty neat if you just want to not type enter every time on the console and every time you want to rerun your test suite. So this is the watch plugin on PEST PHP. Now, who here uses coverage on your tests? So you guys know the pain it is, right? Coverage on PHP in general, at least from when the time I was creating this coverage for PEST, is just a mess, right? It exports a PHP file, then you need to kind of import it somewhere, or exports HTML, then you need to open on Chrome to see it, but then it's just not pretty. Ugh. So I have come up with something that I think you will like. I'm going to expand here the console. And something that I really wanted with PEST is just have the possibility of having something really pretty on the console regarding coverage, something that I could really see with my eye. So what you can do with PEST is simply pass the option coverage. And once you do that, you immediately have a full report about coverage on your console. So we still have the summary of my test suite on top, meaning that 2 tests have passed and everything, but then I have the total coverage of my test suite. On this case, it's 54. Then I have, for each file on my source code, I have the total coverage that files contains, just like any coverage report. Here, for example, I can see that my exception handler is being tested at 100%, but then the authenticate middleware on Laravel is not being tested at all, probably because I don't have a single authentication test on my test suite. Then if I scroll down, I can see the full report, and inclusive, I can see, for example, this route service provider, which has 88% test coverage. And why? Well, because the line 49 is not being covered. So all of that information straight from the console. You don't need to go anywhere. And obviously a little bit displayed in a prettier way, so it just fits the eye. Now, if you use coverage, something that you want for sure is just use coverage on the CI, because something you don't want is a colleague doing a pull request that actually decreases the test coverage, right? So check this out. You can just come to PEST and say, all right, just display the coverage, but also ensure that there is a minimum of 60%. Now, when I run this, PEST PHP also displays the report, but then at the bottom I have this fail, meaning that, oh, the code coverage is below expected. I expected at least 60%, but what I have now is 54. Therefore, the test suite will fail. And obviously, if I clear my terminal and I rerun the same parameters, but now with 50, we are above coverage, so we are good in coverage, so my test suite will now pass. So this is coverage on PEST PHP. Now, to end this demo, I really wanted to show you one of our last plugins that I'm really proud of. And before I tell you what it is, I'm going to actually show you the need. I'm going to get back here and just put my terminal on the right again. And as you saw during this presentation, we actually have 2 tests, right? We have a unit test right here, which is this one, and we have a feature test, which is this one. Now, if I come to the feature test, and if I introduce a sleep of 3 seconds, just like this, and if I go again to my unit test now, I'm going to introduce again another sleep of 3 seconds. So now our test suite contains 2 tests, and those 2 tests take 3 seconds to run. How many times do you think the full test will take to run? 6? No. So basically, just like PHP unit, a PEST also runs your tests sequentially. And what it means? Well, means that PEST runs the unit test, takes 3 seconds, and then runs the feature test, which equally takes 3 seconds, making a grand total of 6 seconds. So I'm going to go to my terminal, run PEST, and you will see what I'm talking about. First test I've run took 3 seconds. The second test I've run and took a grand total of everything, 6 seconds. Now, just like PHP unit again, tests are being run sequentially, so we are kind of used to it. But it wouldn't be nice if things could just run in parallel, like tests just go like this and they run as the fastest as possible. They use the full power of your machine. It would be nice, right? So PEST PHP is the only framework in PHP for testing that ships with built-in parallel testing capacities. So I'm going to clear the terminal and just run PEST parallel, just like that. And suddenly, we have a test suite that went from 6 seconds to 3 seconds, okay? And to give you the context about this feature, we have seen like improvements that are just nuts. Test suite went from 5 minutes, for example, to 20 seconds. It really just depends on your machine. If you have a 10-core machine, for example, test suites can go up to 10 times faster. So parallel was really a life-changing improvement we have done on PEST, and we are really proud of it. And by the way, if you think that by using parallel things will just not work, other kind of things, well, I can show you that, for example, I can simply type parallel and equally pass the coverage option if I want to, and things will still work. As you can see, we have the full report, and tests just take 3 seconds to run as well. I hope you like this demo, but let me show you some stats about PEST PHP before we close off. Now, something we are also really proud of is the number of downloads of PEST. With 1 year since the stable release, we just have reached 2 million downloads. And for a package that basically replaces or goes on top of PHP unit, this is a really good achievement that we are proud of. According to JetBrains, 3 months after the release of PEST PHP, PEST was already the second most used PEST testing framework in the world, with a 6% market share. And, well, PHP Unit is in the first place and probably will be there forever. Still, it's something we are proud of. Finally, something to keep in mind is the plugin for PHP Storm. If you think you will lose some kind of auto-completion or DX experience because you are using the auto-magic things of PEST, don't think that, because as you can see here, we have full auto-completion, even on properties that were set on the before each method. This was really game changer and was done by a colleague of mine called it Oliver, and I'm really thankful for that. Equally, on the PEST plugin for PHP Storm, you can run a single test if you want to. So all the cool things you are used to on PHP Unit, they are also available on this PEST plugin. Finally, the project is open source, and something that I see a lot is just people afraid of contributing to open source. So PEST is a full organization with a lot of opportunities. We have a website, documentation, design. There's a lot of things to keep this, to bring PEST to the masses. So if you are up to getting started with open source, don't hesitate and just reach me out. There is a lot of opportunities here. Also a shout out to all the content creators out there who are doing content about PEST. This is Vinicius Dias from Brazil, who creates content in Brazilian, Portuguese from Brazil. And basically helps a lot. Like PEST really increases the number of people when content creators such as Vinicius Dias starting doing content about PEST. And also, of course, Freak from Spassy releases the full testing course about PEST PHP for 4 hours course, I believe, which, I mean, just brings all the people together to PEST, which is pretty cool. Finally, don't forget to visit the website, pestphp.com. It's really the place to go if you want to start with PEST. If you just liked it, what you just saw on this demo, go to pestphp.com, you just get started. There is a full table of contents of features, what is the expectation API, all those methods, everything is there. And that's it for me. Visit pestphp.com, and thank you so much for being there.
All right, thank you, Nuno. brilliant like coding skills, by the way.
Thank you, thank you.
So are there any questions? There, I'm gonna bring the microphone.
Hello. I want to ask if PEST can be some kind of substitution for orchestra test bench when try to test packages. And you know, when I have to develop a package for Laravel, I have to use orchestra test bench and all the stuff in it. Can PEST be an alternative to it?
Well, in fact, PEST can use test bench to test your Laravel packages. So in the middle of this presentation, I have kind of show you this PEST PHP configuration file, which you can use to instruct what test case can be used on your test suite. Well, with orchestrated test bench, there is this test case that basically extends the entire Laravel thing. The only thing you need to do is really say, PEST, use this workbench test bench thing within the test folder, and you are set to go. You can do like that. Good question.
Thanks for the presentation, very interesting. I'm curious about how did you implement the parallel execution?
Good question. So PEST, as I have told you, is built on top of PHP Unit. And one thing, we are really proud of it because it makes test suites progressive, but we can also init all the features and plugins for PHP Unit. So this third-party plugin for PHP Unit with the name of Paratest. And the only thing we have done is kind of build an official and a built-in integration of Paratest within the PEST core, which makes everything just possible. But if you are curious about technical detail, what it does exactly, it's running a single test on a separate process, which is a separate process for each core. It's a bit more advanced, but runs every test on a separate process. At the end, combine them together, and potentially display the coverage. But that's the way it works.
Hi. Could you share a mock test with the Laravel or not?
Can you repeat, please?
Could you share a mock test? How to write a mock with the PEST instead of PHP?
Oh, I actually could have done that. Yeah. So to
mock or stub is the same.
Yeah, so your question is, how can I mock things with PEST PHP? Well, in fact, you can use, if you want to, the this get mock from PHP Unit that will give you a mock back if you want to. But on PEST, we have a plugin for that, which is called mocked. And the only thing you need to do is use the mock function, pass the object you would like to mock, and then there is an API for detailing the methods you would like to mock, how many times you would like to get them called. So mocking, we have a plugin, full documentation that could help you get started with that. But you can use the PHP Unit API if you want to, which will be this get mock, and you will be all set. Thank you.
So we have a question from the online audience, actually a couple. One is about the watch feature. Does it rerun all the tests or only the tests in the changed files?
But in fact, at this specific moment, reruns all tests, but we are actively working on getting it changed to actually run the tests that are needed. Now, there is a technical issue on that, which is sometimes you change a source code, you think it just affects one specific feature, but in fact affect all of them, for example. So sometimes you want to rerun the entire thing, and sometimes you don't. But, well, at this specific time, reruns everything, but we are working actively on trying to get something on that. Good question.
Hi.
The online audience.
What about the integration with Symfony kernel test cases? It seems from your presentation that if I want to test some integration stuff with Symfony, I just configure my PEST configuration with the kernel test case. Is it that right, or there's something more?
Yeah, so we have successfully integrated PEST with Symfony. Now, there is one thing is that I'm a little bit Laravel-ish. You probably have noticed during my talk. I don't have that much experience with Symfony, and that's why we don't have an official plugin for Symfony. But I know that members of the community have created documentation about it and how can you make it work very easily. But if our answer. PEST just works with Symfony. The only thing you need to do is just use that configuration file. And with all those helpers, you can make it work.
Another question here.
Oof. I have a question, two questions actually. One is like, how do you do coverage specification? It's like, you know, you do them through annotations in PHP unit. And another one is like, is the output for CI, can it be the same, or is like, or is it different for like Jenkins, TimCD, or whatever?
Okay. So the first question is, how do I generate that coverage, right? And how that get displayed? Yeah, so by default, just like PHP unit, everything needs to be reported to the coverage. Of course, you can use PHP unit annotations to kind of say, ignore that specific line if you want to. And how we generate this, I've told you during this presentation that coverage on PHP unit, you can specify this option, call it coverage PHP, which generates like a PHP file. And the only thing we do is that we put that file on a temporary folder, we read it, and we just read it to the console and display all of that information in that pretty way. The second question was about how exactly that display with colors and everything you have get displayed on a CI. Well, it depends on the CI. Like GitHub Actions, you can actually use colors and you get everything like pretty, just like on the normal, regular laptop. There is CIs who don't support colors, and what we do on those cases is that we don't display colors at all. So you would see everything black and white. But still pretty.
All right, we have another one from the online audience. Andy asks, is it possible to output the number of assertions?
With the current, there is multiple printers this time for PEST. The one you have saw is like a default one. But in fact, if you want to, you can still use the PHP unit default printer with PEST, which I wouldn't do that, but you can do it. And on that one, you will get the number of assertions. Now, with a default printer, which doesn't contain the number of assertions because we think it's irrelevant.
All right. Plenty of things to discuss here. So thanks again to Nuno. Give it another applause.
Thank you.